Zoey is too drunk for this dystopia. Chapter 31. The suits allowed the concerned citizen mob to dig for about 2 hours, long enough for several arguments to break out regarding whether or not they were digging correctly, or in the right spot, or if they should just wait for heavy equipment to arrive. Those following the drama needed regular updates and plot twists, with steadily rising stakes. When Rose's buried torture chamber wasn't immediately found, the hive mind started to get antsy. It was clearly time for Act 2. Zoey, Will, and Andre were now huddled around Echo near the back door of the hangar at the old airfield, watching the feed. All four of them were wearing white plastic overalls over their clothes, along with rubber gloves that, to Zoey, didn't seem quite sturdy enough for the task. Once they confirmed that there were no possible witnesses within a mile of the facility, Echo started a new stream. Faking a live stream with recorded footage was the oldest trick in the Blinks hoax playbook, because there really was no way to detect it. The tool Echo was using was just a slightly more convoluted method of pointing a live camera at a monitor playing the pre-recorded events. The way such feeds were debunked was by other witnesses with cameras of their own physically going to the location and verifying if events were playing out as portrayed. That meant the team had a narrow window in which to act. Echo's stream, ostensibly live but playing footage recorded hours ago, did not immediately catch on. This was no surprise. Whenever there's a big trending event like this, there are always false leads. Streamers attempting to drum up a following by faking some new development. So, when this one began, only a few hundred users tuned in to watch a small group of figures in white robes and creepy doll-like masks try to bang down the side door of an abandoned airplane hangar. But, just as Echo had predicted, it slowly gained traction, as viewers who'd grown bored with the combat motocross dig began browsing around for alternatives. As the audience tuned into the fake live feed, first as a trickle and then as a flood, this is what they saw. The video wasn't great quality, the product of the cheapest last model button-sized camera they had on hand, one with poor night vision capabilities. It opened on a pack of 5 figures in robes and masks, attempting to shoulder tackle their way through the locked side door of a large structure. The camera operator, who spoke in a voice that someone recognized as that of Lyra Connor, pointed her camera toward another figure in an identical robe and mask and asked for an update. They answered in a voice that repeat customers of the Chalet Intimacy Parlor might have recognized as that of fill-in manager Axolotl. "We are, as all of you know, the Liberationists." Axel was saying this from behind a mask that wasn't exactly like those used by the Liberators, but close enough. It was a porcelain doll mask, white with red painted lips and dark shadows around the eyes. It was the best the suits could find on short notice. "This whole town has decided to look for Rex at his motorcycle track or whatever, but our drone, Azalea, has done its work." Axel gestured into the sky, where a white blur was hovering high up at the edge of the frame. According to the script, the name of the drone was Azrael, but either Axel had forgotten it, or, more likely, just decided they liked Azalea better. "And has traced poor Rose's location to here, in this old-ass haunted airport. If Rex is in there, well, either he'll surrender himself for judgment, or we will deliver judgment of our own, on the spot." Axel held up an object that even a caveman could have identified as a blunt weapon. "I got it, here," said another voice from off-camera. Another liberationist to run up, handing a tool to Axel about the size and shape of a battery-operated drill. Axel pressed it to the door. The device was a cutting tool, slicing through the door as quickly as Axel could move it, as easily as a marker drawing a line. They carved out the part of the door containing the knob and deadbolt, then kicked it open. The wearer of the camera pushed through the door, and the view swung around the room. The space was much more cluttered than the first time Zoey had seen it. and it was a lot to take in for any casual viewer who dropped into the feed out of curiosity. One would glimpse machines and large glass vats, hints of stray blood and meat on the floor. But then the camera settled on the shipping container, now with a giant pile of dirt pushed up against the door on the end, and with that, the follower count instantly exploded. Lyra, who'd actually refused payment for her performance until Zoey insisted, pointed toward the container. "There! It wasn't buried at all! He just pushed some dirt up against the door to keep her from getting out! We have to clear the dirt away!" The liberationists ran over as if to claw away the dirt with their bare hands. Axel said, "No, I can slice through the side." Axel ran up and banged on the side of the container with open palms. "You hear me in there, Rose?" A faint, frantic voice answered in the affirmative. "Go all the way to the back," shouted Axel through the wall, "as far from the door end as you can go. This cutter sprays sparks and molten bits of metal all over the place." That aspect of the cutting tool was, in fact, something they discovered when they'd run through this part during rehearsal, when Axel had accidentally set Andre's shirt on fire. "Yell when you're safe." Axel cut into the wall of the container, and by the time Rose was pulled through the smoking hole, wearing the same filthy underwear she'd worn for her broadcast at Catharsis, theirs was the most popular Blink feed in any category in the English-speaking world. They asked Rose if she was okay, if she knew where any other victims might be. Rose found herself too stunned to answer. That's because she was gawping at what surrounded her in the hangar, seeing the sex butcher's operation for the first time. The liberationists looked around them, and then they too were stunned into silence. Hulking meat slicing and chopping machines, stained with old blood, plastic wheeled carts full of butchered remains, and 3 vertical glass vats, 1 empty, 2 occupied with unthinkable horrors. Axel muttered, "What the f—" The camera zoomed in to reveal what the 2 occupied vats contained. A Frankenstein combination of women and pigs. Mismatched human and swine limbs stitched together for some unknowable purpose. They had no heads. At the stumps of their necks were bundles of wires and clear tubes pumping blood, as if to keep the bodies alive, absent a brain to maintain those functions. In response to this sight, Rose delivered, in a trembling whisper, her longest section of dialogue, and also the bit she'd struggled with the most during filming. The take Clarence Crockett went with in the final cut never quite felt authentic to Zoey, but maybe that was just the scrutiny that came from having seen it several dozen times. "He was turning them into sex slaves," said Rose. "He told me, he joked about it, about how he wanted to slice off the useless parts of a woman and keep the rest. I didn't know what he meant, but I think he was trying to find a way to make new bodies and keep them alive so he could do what he wanted with them. He had some kind of AI that would stimulate the muscles and control the limbs, cause them to go through the motions, react while he had sex with them." Zoey had never liked that part. She felt like it was over-explaining, that there was no reason Rose would have this much information about Sex Butcher Rex's devious plan. But Clarence the director insisted average viewers didn't mind that kind of thing, that the pure visceral shock value would override the logic centers of their brains. Will pointed out that the holes in this little stunt would no doubt reveal themselves in the weeks and months ahead, but only after everyone had moved on from the story. They only needed the illusion to hold up for the next 24 hours or so. One of the other white-robed figures, a woman saying her only line, asked, "What are all these machines for?" "The failed attempts," replied Rose. "The ones that didn't work. That must be how he disposed of them. Look, that's a machine for grinding hamburger. He must have been grinding them up and I don't know. I don't want to know." "We have to get out of here before he gets back," screamed Lyra from behind her mask. "No," shouted Rose. "I can't leave them like this." She was referring to the two headless zombie pig sex slave cyborgs in the vats. Rather than argue, which had actually been scripted but cut for time, Axel strode over to the vats with a club and smashed the glass, allowing the liquid inside to rush onto the floor. "Burn them," said Rose, gesturing toward a row of red gas cans over by the wall. Echo had pointed out during the filming that there would have been no reason for the sex butcher to have a bunch of containers of accelerant just sitting around, but Clarence had again said it wouldn't matter. If you try to make a video for the nitpickers, the effort will be missed by the average viewer, and the nitpickers still won't be happy because they're incapable of happiness in general. Narrator's note, I take offense to that. While the liberationists splashed gasoline around the sex butcher's cyber monster sex slave cannibal lair, a voice from off-camera asked, "What are you doing?" The camera swung over to find Rex himself standing in the very doorway that Axel had just kicked in minutes earlier. Tens of millions of Blink viewers all over the world gasped in front of their screens at, again, something they believed was occurring live. Will had reluctantly played the part of Rex because he was the only one of them whose build roughly matched. Will was only 2 inches taller in real life, but that wasn't the kind of thing anyone would notice right away. He wore the actual jacket Rex had been wearing the night he died, recovered from the rubble at Carnivore Tech's. Will said the lines in his own voice, which was then redubbed in Rex's voice, built by an AI via analysis of millions of words the man had spoken on camera over the years. Rex strode into the room, brandishing a gun. "Whatever she said, it's a lie. Rose came here on her own free will." His voice had been calibrated to sound deranged, the tone of a man who was on a 30-hour bender with no end in sight, a psychopath who reached the final, careless stage, the serial murderer becoming a spree killer. His physical mannerisms matched perfectly, because the man playing the role was, himself, mentally strung out nearly to the point of collapse. "That's not true," shouted Rose. "As for them," he sneered, gesturing toward the pig women in the vats, "I found them like that. I don't even know what they are." "Just put that down," replied Axel. "If you're really innocent, let the cops decide." Axel had struggled to deliver that part without sounding sarcastic, but they used the best take they had. "If you destroy them," he said of the vat monstrosities, "you'll be the murderers. They're as alive now as they ever were before, because that's all they were when they were alive. Receptacles, just like all of you." Rex ran over, grabbing for Rose as if he intended to leave with her. An altercation ensued that wasn't perfectly convincing to Zoe's eyes, but she knew real fights never looked like the movies anyway, so the awkwardness would sell it as authentic, if anything. Rex fired his gun, missing everyone. Axel swung their club and connected with his arm, causing him to drop his weapon. Enraged, Rex grabbed Rose by the neck and shoved her toward the largest of the meat processing machines. He kicked a red button with his foot, and the machine roared to life, metal teeth spinning inside a feed chute large enough to swallow an entire side of beef. "This is your fault!" he screamed over the machine. "All you've tried to do is bring me down!" He twisted a shrieking Rose toward the meat grinder, and her shrieks sounded very genuine, probably because she really had been terrified of the thing. Rex grabbed her hair and made like he was going to push her face into it. "Stop," said a new voice, and the camera swung around to find Dee Dee in full vigilante garb. She ran up and, with her flattened hand, smacked Rex in the head. This moment had been another point of bitter contention, with Dee Dee insisting that she be allowed to smack Rex's head clean off his body. But there was A, no way to do that effect convincingly, and B, no way to make that work with the rest of the program, which would, in fact, be performed live for an audience. So, instead, the blow was only enough to cause Rex to stumble and let go of Rose. The rest of the liberationists rushed in to pull Rose away while Dee Dee and Axel advanced on Rex together. They pushed him toward the whirring machine as he struggled against them, growling threats about all the ways he would torture them once he'd gotten free. Lyra screamed, "Grind him up!" from behind the camera. something that had not been scripted, but she'd seemed to have gotten lost in the scenario a bit, spending the rest of the scene uttering curses toward Rex, some of which Zoey had never heard before. The fake Rex put one foot up on the grinding machine, trying to use his leg to push himself away from the chute and the whirring blades that awaited within. At this point, the camera swung away, as if the wearer had spun away from the scene, either in revulsion or maybe just to avoid the splatter. The audio, however, still captured the gruesome sound of a man's leg being fed into an industrial-grade hamburger grinder, which the team had created by feeding a man's leg into an industrial-grade hamburger grinder. The video then cut off, as if the camera had been shut off. The fake video feed that had taken nearly 20 people several hours to put together ran for only 7 minutes and 40 seconds. The finished product still wasn't exactly what they'd planned. For example, they'd originally hoped to shoot the events from multiple angles, since the idea that such a group would show up with only one camera was significantly less believable than the existence of the Sex Butcher dungeon itself. But there was no time to make a second or third feed perfect, so they'd scrapped it. Regardless, now the live portion was about to begin. The issue, as always, would be time. The suits knew that the moment Echo's fake feed appeared interesting, real people would be heading to the airfield as quickly as they could get there, at which point the locked fence around the facility would hopefully buy the suits a few more minutes. It's true that the shovel-wielding mob at the motocross track were easily an hour away, even on a good traffic day. But the fake feed needed to completely play itself out before anyone laid eyes on the interior of the hangar. Any Blink user who happened to be right next door or driving past could show up early and spoil the party. So the suits frantically working inside the hangar had one ticking clock, to be finished and out of there long before the 7 minutes and 40 seconds of pre-recorded feed elapsed, and then, separately, had to hope that no witnesses showed up to the scene within that window. Thus, while the world watched the liberationists burst into the door of the hangar via Blink, Echo was saying, "Go, go, go!" to Zoey, Andre, and Will, who all rushed out the back door to a borrowed catering truck they'd parked just outside. That truck contained a refrigerator section and a warming section, which was probably great for making sure the roasted chicken and bean salad were both at the perfect temperature for wedding reception. In the suit's case, they'd been hauling around 2 halves of 2 separate corpses in the refrigerated section to halt decomposition. About an hour earlier, they had gone through the messy process of dragging them across the truck to the warming section. They left them in long enough to heat to just over 100 degrees, so that the parts would be at roughly human body temperature when, or if, the first bystanders in the scene felt the need to touch them. These, Will was fond of pointing out, were the little details that, if overlooked, could screw up a psyop and alter the course of history. The legs, which Kowalski had provided from a corpse, had already been fed into the hamburger grinder as the final step of filming the fake feed. Now, they were carefully pulling out the other half, the severed torso of Rex that they had recovered from the bomb site. It had oozed all over the truck, and Zoey made a point of telling Will that she didn't want it ever used to haul food again. They hustled the leaking torso into the hangar and put it into position in the hamburger grinder chute, the arms dangling out in such a way as to prevent it from sliding in further. They splashed around some blood so that it would still be wet for whoever arrived first, wiped up any fluids they'd spilled on the way. Then they turned on the meat grinder, made sure the liberationists and Dee Dee were in the right positions, then got the hell out of there. They had cut it terrifyingly close. The first bystander on the scene was a passing farmer who was totally unaware of the Blink drama, but was set to receive alerts regarding proximity to any violent crime in progress. He kept a pump shotgun in his truck for just such occurrences. He arrived at the fence before the video had even ended, but stopped at the gate. Ramming through chain link with a pickup truck looks easy in an action movie, but at best is going to scratch the hell out of your front end, and the farmer still had 7 years of payments left. Instead, he laboriously climbed over and, even with that delay, breached the hangar a mere 40 seconds after the pre-recorded stream had ended. If he'd had a camera, or had just thought to look, He'd have seen the suits racing away in their catering truck. But that wasn't his focus. He arrived with an understanding that a woman was being rescued from her captor, and that the heroes doing the rescuing may need help. He had thus burst into the hangar and found the masked liberationists standing around the whirring meat grinder, gore scattered at their feet. Axel punched the off button on the machine, and the farmer observed that on the output end was a spray of chopped up muscle, skin, and bone. Lying in the machine's mechanical mouth was the actual intact torso of Rex Rex. It was clear what had happened, and would be even clearer to someone who'd been watching the supposed live feed. The sex butcher had, ironically, been butchered, turned into hamburger, feet first. If the farmer had touched the torso, like to check for a pulse, he'd have discovered that it was exactly as warm as one would expect a freshly dead corpse to be. But neither he nor anyone else would feel the need to do that, so the whole effort to make sure the partial corpse was the correct temperature had been a total waste of time. Instead, the farmer walked close enough to the corpse to see that it was, in fact, the famous Blink influencer Rex Rex, but not so close that he would be standing in the slain man's blood. Only the farmer had no idea who Rex Rex was, so that detail was also lost on him, and he backed away so as not to contaminate a crime scene. The farmer asked everyone present if they were all right, assuring them that help was on the way. Sure enough, 2 more witnesses soon popped in the door behind the farmer, a young couple who very much did know who Rex was, and who were at least a little familiar with the sex butcher case. They also approached just close enough to confirm that what they'd heard on the stream had taken place in real life, that Rex had died via partial hamburgerification, and that the extremely identifiable top half of him lay in the machine's bloody feed chute. They took plenty of pictures and video, and no amount of analysis would ever find that the corpse they recorded was not, in fact, exactly who it appeared to be. A pair of camera drones then buzzed in, creating additional verification. No amount of interrogation of the witnesses or analysis of their captured footage would reveal any inconsistencies. Rex's torso was wearing the tailored shirt and jacket he'd been wearing when last seen. His fingers bore his custom-made jewelry, the necklace given to him by his grandmother hung around his neck. Unassailable third-party records of the aftermath had been created. A new truth had been birthed into the world. One of the newly arrived drones, Zoey noticed while watching from their fleeing vehicle, was wearing a tiny red hat. At this point, Rose, who'd had to make herself cry a second time to match the physical state she'd been in at the end of the pre-recorded video, asked the newcomers to back away. In a state of determined, righteous rage that she had to perform live and with no second takes, she borrowed the laser cutter from Axel and used it to ignite the gasoline that had been splashed on every object in the vicinity. It actually took several tries to ignite it, and Zoey held her breath the entire time. But then it caught, and the sex butcher's lair went up in flames. Chapter 32. It was hard to anticipate, Will had said, how a devoted fan base would react to a scandal, in the same way that it's hard to know how a cult's followers would react to a fallen leader. But it usually depended on the offense. A professional athlete will never lose his fans over charges of tax evasion, but evidence of rigging games is lethal. A teen heartthrob can probably survive accusations of cheating on his girlfriend, but not, say, getting caught on camera strangling a dog. It all comes down to how uncomfortable it becomes for fans to express support publicly. As Echo had noted earlier, humans are social creatures who instinctively want others' approval of their tastes. It thus takes a special kind of scandal to make fans burn their idol's merchandise in the streets, knowing they can never again be seen wearing it in public. It said quite a bit about Rex Rex's fans that, with each suggestion of how to stage his ignominious It said quite a bit about Rex Rex's fans that, with each suggestion of how to stage his ignominious death, Will had shaken his head and said, "No, It has to be Stranger. When, at the conference room brainstorming session, Zoey had finally suggested what she thought the sex butcher's lair should look like, everyone agreed it would probably work, and then kind of avoided talking to her for a while after that. Sure enough, in the couple of hours since the event, there didn't seem to be a lot of Rex defenders making their voices heard. Hurting sex workers was one thing, but what he was doing was just weird. This, of course, did nothing to help Alonzo's poll numbers. Any hope for that, if there ever was any hope at all, would come in the morning, with Act 3. For now, news of what occurred out at the old airport needed to percolate and marinate in the zeitgeist. As such, way down the list of trending topics, a single word kept coming up, ascending on the wings of rumor and the occasional sightings of an odd shape in the sky. Azalea. Sure, it wasn't trending above Justice for Bandito, but it was slowly gaining steam. It was now the wee hours of the morning, and Zoey was in one of the white sedans with Andre, heading toward the former Action Safari French bistro. She'd been texting with her mother, who was still doing her canvassing among those on the contact list who were known to be up overnight. In this city, that was no small number of people. Zoey said, "I can't get over what my mom told me about how their vote canvassing plan was all about picking out this small group of voters who actually matter." "Well," replied Andre, "it's not that they matter more as human beings. They're just the types who spend more time and energy socializing and keeping on top of trends, that kind of thing. Most normal folk don't have time for that nonsense. They're too busy working their jobs and raising their kids. So when they want to know what to do, what to wear, or what to eat, they look to the whales." The what? "Oh, come on now. You've owned enough casinos to know what a whale is." "Oh, right. A big shot." "Well, a big spender. A heavy user. About a quarter of the city's gambling revenue is from this tiny group of rich, obsessive players. We're talking the top 1/2 of 1%. You can pick any vice. You'll get the same. Alcohol. Your real profit comes from the top 10% of drunks, the guys who down 75 drinks a week. Opinions about politics are like that. A sliver of the population forms strong opinions, and everybody else just looks to them to decide what they should think. Let me give you a tip. Should you ever find yourself in such a position, if you want to run a city, focus on the whales." "You mean the rich donors? I'm pretty sure politics has worked like that forever." "No, I mean the whales in all areas, not just money. Like crime. About 70% of this city's armed violence is done by the same group of a few hundred people. We're talking literally 250 or 300 individuals. Instead of treating crime like it's this looming dark cloud of evil, or blaming a whole race or demographic, you zero in on the tiny pack of individuals capable of carrying out these acts and intervene. Go right to the whales." "I'm starving, but I feel like it's inappropriate for me to stop and eat. I've been obsessed with getting a fancy corn dog ever since I ran into Monkey Sheriff at Catharsis." "There'll be people serving food at the Safari Bistro." "I don't think it's still a working restaurant." "No, but in this city, where there are crowds, there are food trucks." "Crowds?" Traffic was at a standstill, blocks away from the abandoned bistro. Sleepless curiosity seekers were choking the sidewalks and streets, even clogging the parking lots of the surrounding businesses. Zoey had assumed Aviv had fans. It had been a tragedy if all that cost and risk was for, like, 30 people, but it somehow hadn't occurred to her that his arrest and subsequent abduction would draw a crowd. She had been told that some were holding a vigil outside of the restaurant, but wasn't expecting this. Zoey asked, "Does no one in this city have to get up for work in a few hours?" "Lots of businesses close on Election Day," said Andre. "It's got something of a party atmosphere. But also, pretty much everyone on Blink following this story thinks this is all the prelude for one of Aviv's patented stunts. They think the arrest, getting snatched up by this guy, that it's the equivalent of a stage musician making a big show of getting chained up in a straitjacket before he's lowered into a tank of water. Not just that he'll get out, but that he'll do it with style." "Well, he's not." Andre didn't reply. I mean, his team told me that directly, and they'd have to be in on it if he had anything planned. Still nothing from Andre. We're about to risk everything to get him out, said Zoe, who intended to just keep saying things until Andre responded. He had to know we'd try to come get him. If this is part of a stunt and he intentionally didn't tell me, that's purposefully lying in a way that can get people hurt. I'd never forgive him. More silence for a moment. Then Zoe said, "Just say it." Certain guys, they see everybody else as audience, so they get it in their heads that all will be forgiven if the show was good enough. Like his bit with the yellow robot. He'd probably imagine some cutesy reveal that would leave you mad but a little dazzled at the same time. I'm not saying that's what's happening here. I'm just saying. Let's go. The two of them made their way through the crowd, Zoe feeling Wu's absence as she pushed through a field of sleeves. Andre could probably fend off an attack from any normal assailant, but Zoe fully believed Wu could extract her even if every member of this crowd turned on her at once. It wasn't just that he was capable, it was that he was willing. And that thought almost made Zoe tear up again. She hadn't visited him in the hospital yet, though her presence would probably have just annoyed patient and staff alike. She also decided that her snap decision to plunge into the crowd at Catharsis without Wu at her side was probably the dumbest of her entire life. She was holding a clear plastic shopping bag. They wanted the contents easily viewable and noted as innocuous by even the dumbest guard. The B team of this operation wasn't visible from their viewpoint, but that was by design. Sig and the two biggest and burliest members of Aviv's support crew were 2 blocks away in a borrowed ambulance, dressed as paramedics. The disguises only pertained to their employer, not their qualifications. Aviv's team were, in fact, trained in all manner of emergency medicine, as they were almost always the first response in cases of stunts gone awry. Zoe assumed they had no contingency for, say, reattaching a head freshly severed by a high-tech cheese wire, but they were here for a charade, not medical intervention. At least, that was the hope. The Safari Beef Bonanza, or whatever it was called, had a roof, but no walls to speak of. Thin columns supported an overhead platform on which wild animals full of gears, hydraulics, and circuit boards used to prowl about and lean over the edge to menace arriving customers. It had probably looked pretty cool in its day, but the now deactivated frozen animals up there had been exposed to wind and rain for a couple of years, their fur having molded and sloughed away, leaving them looking like cybernetic zombie predators. Below them was the expanse of faded animal enclosures and tables. The chairs had all been sold or stolen. Aviv was lying on one of the tables and whistling a mournful prison song. The pistol wizard was stalking around the perimeter, twirling his gun around his finger, waiting for somebody to try something. The only barrier between him and the crowd was an old, flimsy orange plastic fence, erected long ago in a token effort to keep curiosity seekers and vandals out of the closed business. What kept the audience at a distance right now was the fear of an augmented armed idiot and the knowledge that any attempt to encroach on the situation would result in a gruesome outcome for their hero. A girl shouted at Zoe and pointed to her head. She, too, had shaved Zoe's stripe in it. Also, Zoe did note that Andre was right about the food trucks. She passed one doing bustling business selling a variety of food, but none of it was corn dogs. Zoe and Andre shouldered their way to the front of the crowd. Pistol Wizard spotted them immediately and strode over, gun in hand, a smirk on his face. "Right. Did you come here to buy your boyfriend's freedom?" asked Pistol Wizard, projecting his voice so the crowd could hear. "Because this cowboy ain't for sale." Zoe held up the bag. "We got here as fast as we could. You don't have to let us in. You don't even have to let us talk to him. But he needs this." Pistol barked a laugh. "How dumb do you think I am?" "It's his seizure medication," said Andre. Sealed in the package. You can have an expert examine it, if you've got one on hand. But the man needs it. Those instructions were given to the cops, but we're guessing you didn't listen when they tried to tell you that, if they even bothered. Whatever his supposed seizure problems, answered Pistol Wizard, I'm sure they can wait one day. Now, you two can just get on out of here. Zoey shot a look to Aviv, who was still lying on the table, but now making eye contact with her. They hadn't discussed this plan with him in advance, of course. They never had the chance. But he had to have overheard the word seizure by now, and it didn't require a particularly nimble mind to put together what that plan was. Listen, said Zoey, this isn't just for his safety, it's for yours. Seizures are more likely when the patient is tired and hungry. Look it up. If Aviv has one, you have to get him to a hospital. But you can't get him to a hospital without killing him. If he dies because of your stupid contraption, then the rabid fans you see around me will have no reason to stay back. The invisible wall keeping them away from you will have dissolved. Pistol Wizard held up his revolver. Now I've got my invisible wall right here. You've got 6 bullets in there, said Andre, against an enraged crowd, and that's just going to make them madder. See, I don't think so, because in that whole crowd, each one is going to wait for someone else to go first, to absorb the bullets, and I'm guessing they won't find any takers. You're being a dick for no reason, said Zoey. Just look in the box, or let me open it and show you the contents, but that's all this is, some medicine, and he said he was bored, so I brought him this. She held up what, hopefully to Aviv's eyes, was a red rubber ball. This one was from Woo's inventory, and Zoey had 0 practice using one, and they did only have one. In a blur of movement, Pistol brought up his gun so that it was pointed directly in her face. Get back. If he doesn't get this, he could have a seizure any minute. The medicine, I mean, not the ball. Do you understand? Any minute. If Aviv hadn't gotten the cue by now, Zoey thought, he never would. With an expression on his face that Zoey interpreted as curious concern, he hopped down from the table and approached. Pistol Wizard spun on him with his revolver. Stop right there. Get back on the table. He spun back to Zoey. Go away. Andre had in his pocket a tiny little device that, Dee Dee had claimed, would spoof the all is well signal to Aviv's constrictor wire collar, but to work, it needed to be close, as in just inches away from the wire, and that was only the first step to extracting Aviv from the situation. All they needed right now was a pretense to get close to him, as if administering emergency first aid. Don't, said Aviv to Zoey, smiling as he approached. I thought you guys might try something like this, because you are the coolest, but there's no need. When he got close, Zoey noticed for the first time that she actually couldn't see a wire around his neck. Aviv looked to the sky. Sig, if you're listening, and I assume you are, call it off. I love you guys, but you don't have to do this. I'm fine. He backed off, and Pistol lowered his weapon. Aviv headed back to his table, but instead of lying down, he hopped up onto it, standing tall as if about to give a speech. It turned out that's because he was. Can everybody hear me? Can I have quiet? Thanks. So, I've had some time to think here, while being a captive of one of this city's super-powered weirdos. And I'll have an honest question. Who out there just wants things to be, normal? Not a dark, theocratic dystopia, not a superhuman freak show. Just a fun city, where you can live your life without waking up to another nightmarish headline. It can't just be me, right? The response from the crowd indicated that it was not, in fact, just him. Zoey and Andre exchanged a look that combined confusion, dread, and utter exhaustion. I know this is last minute, shouted Aviv from his perch, but this city has the best, most advanced voting system in the world, so I think we can make it work. I hereby throw my hat into the ring for the position of Mayor of Tabula Rasa. It is too late to get my name officially on the ballot, but on your voting app, All you have to do is scroll down and fill in my name in the writing blank. The Amazing Aviv is my legal name. You do have to spell it right for it to count. The crowd went wild. Zoey put her face in her hands. She really, really just wanted to go to bed. Voting starts in a few hours, shouted Aviv. I know most normal folks are asleep right now, but when they wake up, I want them to find our writing campaign as the top trending topic. Toss the clowns in the lake, both of them. The Amazing Aviv for mayor. And justice for Bandito. Zoey muttered to Andre, Get me out of here or I'm going to kill him myself. Chapter 33. Zoey watched the fishbowl burn from inside her shower. She had, reluctantly, switched the shower's interior screens from outdoor shower on tropical beach to a news feed. That's where she found out that Aviv had not, in fact, gotten his write-in mayoral bid to be the top trending subject, but it was way up there. It was just part of top people waking up to find that one of the world's most popular streaming influencers had turned out to be a serial murderer who was experimenting with headless porcine sex zombies. The ensuing discussion had even dredged up some forgotten allegations about Rex's connection to a headless corpse in Bali, and, it turned out, similar cases in at least 3 other countries. So she bathed and watched Rex's transparent tour bus being consumed by flames that had been ignited by his own fans. His security entourage, who presumably were only waiting for their final paychecks to clear, did nothing to stop it. It wasn't clear who, specifically, had started the fire, as it was very much a group effort. Many of the most loyal Rex disciples were eager to be seen on camera, publicly rejecting the man and all he had stood for, as were his allied influencers. Zoey turned off the feed and finished the bathing and drying process in peace, then made a conscious decision not to bother with the robe. Her outfit for the day was a tailored white jacket and skirt that was supposed to have some kind of symbolic significance, but soon she found herself standing in front of it and thinking about how vividly it would show bloodstains, if this was to be a day for such a thing. Her phone chimed in a message. Zoey had texted Wu earlier to ask how he was doing, but wasn't expecting a response. It just felt weird to not at least ask. So she was caught off guard when it turned out the message was from the man himself. Wu, all caps. Zoey, thank you for your message. A pause, as if he was struggling to type. Unfortunately, it is clear now that I'm going to die. She felt her heart sink. Could she even get to the hospital to be with him in person? Would his family even allow her in? Wu was still typing, ever so slowly. Wu, of boredom. Zoey groaned and replied, You almost gave me a heart attack. Have you had your surgery yet? After a very long pause, during which Zoey was afraid Wu had fallen asleep, he replied, 12 hours of combined surgery on the crushed leg, trauma surgery, and then orthopedic. Still need one more, and then surgery on ankle. Zoey replied with a frowny face. Wu, but the boredom is the worst. Zoey, well, just focus on getting better. There was another pause, long enough for Zoey to assume the conversation was over. She set herself to getting dressed, deciding on the white suit because she didn't want to devote the energy to finding something else. Then, Wu, the doctors say I won't be able to walk. For the second time, Zoey's heart sank. Surely there was something that could be... Wu, normally, until I've had months of physical therapy. Zoey, hey, would you mind waiting until you have the entire message typed up before sending it? Wu, no. Pause. Wu, problem. Zoey sighed, tossed her phone onto the bed, and got ready for Act 3. She had made everyone meet in the kitchen for the morning let's all gather to see what fresh hell awaits us activity. Only after arriving in the kitchen, fully dressed in her symbolic white suit, did she realize she was starving. They had not, in fact, hit up any of the food trucks at the scene of the Aviv fiasco, and she'd collapsed into bed upon her return to the estate. Her hunger had been awakened by the heavenly, unmistakable scent of Carlton's waffle iron doing its work. She entered the kitchen to find Andre at the food bar, talking to someone on the phone, his tone conveying that he was in overdrive, trying to charm them into doing something they presumably did not want to do. Bud's spot next to him was conspicuously vacant. Will was deep in conversation with Echo, and neither of them looked up at her when she entered. No Wu, no Bud, no one to talk to. She went to the bar next to Andre and asked Carlton what was for breakfast. Next to him was a wire rack onto which he had arranged the thick, finished waffles so that they could take on a curved shape, like taco shells. "Korean street waffles," said Carlton. "A favorite of Arthur's when he was anticipating a particularly hard day. A crispy, warm waffle, folded to hold a generous filling of cream cheese, honey, and whipped cream in layers." Oh, God. "Arthur used to say that the dish did nothing to make the events of the day turn out well, but that for a few minutes, at least, all would seem right with the world." A moment later, Will came over and saw Zoey about to ram her face into the cream and waffle taco. He nodded toward her spotless white suit. "You might want to eat that with a knife and fork." "You can use a knife and fork to eat a butt. What's the status of all the simultaneous horrors happening in our world?" Damon has scheduled his morning press conference at 8, after he makes a big show of using the app to cast his vote. We, or rather, the Liberationists, have scheduled a press conference that is to occur immediately after Damon finishes his. So for right now, it's Damon's move. Zoe's mother burst into the room. "Oh, waffle tacos! Honey, you should be wearing a bib. That shirt is like $5,000. It had, Zoe knew, actually cost a lot more than that. Zoe's mother was wearing a presumably less expensive t-shirt that said, "Justice for Bandito," around an animated graphic of a sassy-looking raccoon with a halo and angel wings. Echo said, "He's apparently on his way to the lectern now." Zoe's mother asked, "When will we know who's winning?" "That's a little complicated. No one has the right to see the vote counts in real time, as that could skew the results. But when people vote on the app, they get the option to report their choice publicly, without their name, of course. It kind of works as an instant exit poll, and that does update in real time." "The problem," said Andre, who'd apparently finished his call, "is that you get into all sorts of game theory nonsense. Maybe Alonso voters are reporting their votes as Damon to boost his numbers and motivate other Alonso voters to punch their ballot to catch up. Or maybe one candidate appeals to a certain personality type that's more likely to tell the world who they support." Zoe bit into the waffle and tried to suppress the indecent noises she wanted to make upon tasting it. "So," said Zoe, wiping a full tablespoon of whipped cream from her face, "what you're saying is that we have data, but it's bad data." "Which," added Will after sipping his drink, "is worse than no data at all." "I think the show's about to begin," said Andre, taking a street waffle from Carlton. "Everybody cross your fingers and hope he takes the bait." Since there were no official polling places, Leonidas Damon decided to hold his ceremonial vote and speech at the scene of Rex's burned-out tour bus, smoke still wafting from smoldering embers. The man liked having apocalyptic ruins in the backdrop of his public events. "I won't keep you long," began Damon. "I know that most of you, my supporters especially, have work to get to, children to take to school, business to conduct, and at this point in the campaign, what is left to say? We are on the winning side of history, and our people are already proving it. We will burn out the poison that flows through the veins of this city. They call me a dictator, but I am not the one who is going to cleanse tabula rasa. You will." He gestured to the crowd, specifically to the row of white robes who had been given their usual conspicuous spot in the front. It's the citizens who are rising up, fighting back. That's what we've seen over these last few days. A populace that thirsts for justice. All I want to do is harness that energy to say, what can we, as a government, do to help? When I take office, and the predators of this city cower in fear, it won't be me they see in their nightmares. It will be you. A clamor of approval from the crowd. Societies can't be reformed from the top down, he continued. It has to happen on the streets, on every corner, in every alley. Change comes from every citizen who sees wrongdoing and says, "No, not in my town, scumbag." A roar from the crowd, but a bigger roar from the white robes in front. Now go vote. Let's send a message. The feed ended. Will took a deep breath, finished the rest of his drink, then looked to Echo. Tell them we're a go. The knockoff Liberators group, the Liberationists, had been Zoey's idea. She'd had some trouble putting her finger on exactly what bothered her about Leonidas Damon, aside from the hundreds of obvious things that bothered her. She finally decided that it was how he tried to have it both ways. He wanted the benefits of a like-minded gang roaming the streets to enforce his rules, but without the drawbacks of accountability. His connection to them was, by design, nebulous and unspoken, an association that existed in the minds of the voters, but on no documentation or payrolls. If they stop a crime, he takes credit. If they screw up, they take the hit. It would be a shame, Zoey had said, if someone were to exploit that ambiguity somehow. So, the press conference they put together for the Liberationists included no fewer than 50 members in white robes and doll masks, the sum total of all the costumes that could be found or made on short notice, and all the associates they could convince to wear them in exchange for a nice payday. It was enough to give the impression to even the mildly informed voter that this was the largest and thus most important faction of the white-robed enforcers. Hell, who was to say these weren't the originals? They'd positioned themselves in front of the main entrance of the giant Crystal Donut Mall, the one that housed the Chalet Intimacy Parlor, among hundreds of other businesses. Axolotl had not been asked to act as the leader of the knockoff Liberators group, but had simply assumed the role and refused to discuss it further. So, backed by this gang of masked and robed angelic crusaders, Axel stood before a crowd of press, street streamers, curious onlookers, and camera drones. It was a galaxy of eyeballs, vastly larger than the one Leonidas Damon had just addressed. "Everybody be quiet," yelled the masked Axel to an already quiet crowd. "We are not looking to get famous. We are just here to let everybody know how things are gonna be from now on. You all have seen by now how things went with Rex in his freaky sex monster dungeon. As Leon Damon just said, we will rid this city of evil. And this time next year, none of y'all will ever leave your house in fear. You will never walk down a dark alley, never cross a parking lot, without the knowledge that there's an angel nearby. You will know it, and the freaky deviants who walk these streets will know it. They will know that a powerful, all-seeing eye will spot their sins, and someone will intervene, right then and there. Gird your loins, folks, because this," dramatic pause, "is Azalea." They'd had it hovering just out of sight, behind the donut mall. On cue, Azalea floated up into view through the center hole of the building, descending over the crowd until it was just overhead, the motors issuing forth a deep rumble at a frequency of 17 hertz, which Will had said was scientifically known to induce dread in the human brain. Every face in the crowd turned skyward. Every mouth gasped. Azalea, or Azrael, as it was supposed to have been called, was a drone built to resemble a biblically accurate angel. It had been Will who'd pointed out that these holy messengers from the Lord were never depicted as women with harps and 2 wings on their back. In the book of Ezekiel, they're described as a wheel intersecting a wheel, full of eyes all around. In Revelation, one is depicted as having 6 wings and is said to be, quote, covered with eyes all around, even under its wings. As such, Azalea was a 20-foot wide, winged, thrumming monstrosity. The rumbling engines were embedded in a feathered abdomen that sprouted 6 white wings. The whole apparatus was then surrounded by 3 intersecting rotating wheels, all of it fabricated in Santa's workshop. There were huge, red, terrifying eyes glued to every surface that could hold them. In the center, on the main body containing the engines, was a 7-foot wide eye the color of blood with a white feathered eyelid that occasionally blinked. As Azalea hovered, always present was that deep thrum felt in the gut, a noise like the guttural growl of a hulking predator. It could be felt from 2 blocks away. "You've seen our angels around," continued Axel. "This here is the next step. See, Azalea doesn't just look out for crime. It looks for sinners, so that they can be stopped before crime happens. Azalea can detect bad intentions instantly. It scans facial expressions, posture, and other scientific markers of bad character. High testosterone, that sort of thing. It instantly recognizes any face, then accesses criminal records, flagging predators in advance." The crowd actually seemed kind of impressed so far. "And this is the amazing part," continued Axel. "This here drone and all the others will be filling the sky with scans blink for any history of sinfulness, with the unclean instantly flagged in the system. It will know if you have been dishonest in your business dealings, when you have had sexual intercourse outside of marriage, and, thanks to voice and face scans, when you have told a lie. Any history of taking a bad tone with a stranger, arguing on the sidewalk, or telling offensive jokes. Everything will be noted and logged." Some muttering from the crowd. This seemed like a step too far, to those paying attention. "It can also detect deviant sexuality in an instant," continued Axel. "Eye-tracking technology tells it exactly where your gaze is pointing at all times. It measures microscopic changes in blood flow to the face and heat signatures to the genitals, which signal arousal. That means if you are a married man ogling the body of a woman who is not your wife, you will be publicly flagged in the system as an adulterer, for the Bible says that you have committed adultery in your heart." A couple of people in the audience laughed, thinking this was a joke. "Laugh it up while you can," said Axel. "Anyone who shows signs of sexual arousal at the sight of anyone more than 7 years younger than themselves will be publicly flagged as a predator and a groomer. Would you like a demonstration? There is a young lady here on the front row wearing a tight t-shirt. In the course of this gathering, 14 men and 3 women have committed adultery in their hearts at the sight of her. They have all been flagged." Some people in the crowd were actively talking back now. Axel ignored them. "For example, you, sir." Axel pointed to a middle-aged man in the crowd. "Thanks to Azalea's detection system, we can say with 100% accuracy that you, a married 46-year-old man, are having an affair with your 25-year-old co-worker. Not only are you an adulterer, but the age difference means you are a predator. Your wife and co-workers have been notified." Every nearby camera turned on the man, who was instantly in a panic. That's not true. We're just friends. It was her idea." The guy, of course, was a plant, paid to play this role. "Azalea, tag this man." The audience had presumably assumed that all of the mentioned markings and flaggings were to be done in some kind of software that would be opt-in for the viewer, and probably continued believing that as the feathery mass of spinning eyes descended on the man. Then the crimson center eye split and opened. From inside came a spray of fluorescent green that painted the man from head to toe. Everyone around him recoiled to avoid the splatter. "That dye glows in the dark and stays on the skin for 5 years. You can't wash it off." This wasn't true, but it's not like such a chemical would be impossible to create. All sinners will be mocked and publicly shamed. Azalea rose and loomed over the uncertain faces below, slowly rotating as if scanning their faces, reading their minds, weighing their souls. Then it locked into position, as if it had found another target. "You, sir," said Axel, pointing to a random man in the crowd, one who was absolutely not in on it. "You just had an explicit sexual fantasy about a young woman who just walked past wearing tight shorts and a tank top. You, too, have been flagged as an adulterer and a predator. You shall be mocked." He sputtered at the denial in much the same way the previous man had, then tried to run. Azalea easily caught up and painted him a bright shade of sinner green. Zoey noticed a few bystanders got paint splatters on their clothes and frantically tried to rub it off. "And of course," continued Axel, "Azalea will know if you have had an abortion or facilitated one for a partner, and will flag you in the system and real life as a murderer." The crowd was now yelling back. It seemed a line had been crossed. Zoey held her breath. In the rear of the pack of liberationists, some of the white robes were slipping away, backing through the doors of the mall. This was their escape plan if the audience got out of control. That is, if this all went exactly according to plan. "But that's not all," shouted Axel, who was standing firm over their objections. "The system also tracks associations via Blink, so that all who continue to employ, work with, or befriend the tagged sinners will also be tagged as sin enablers. You will be named and shamed, cut off from employment and opportunity, until morality returns to this city and this country." Axel ducked to avoid a thrown shoe. "Destroy that thing!" shouted someone from the crowd. It was the first painted man. A chair was flung at the rumbling Azalea drone. I keep saying Azalea. Azalea? Yeah. Azalea drone, knocking off a cloud of feathers. A shoe bounced off its blinking eye, followed by a briefcase that had been hurled with impressive force. Most of the mob was now focused on trying to slay the robotic angel. Most of them. The rest had decided to go after Axel and the remaining liberationists. One guy rushed the lectern. Axel punched him in the jaw, knocking him out cold. Then came a noise loud enough to make the clouds tremble. It was a trumpet, emitting from the spinning angel drone. It was a sound simultaneously regal and terrifying, the signal that a royal avenger had been aroused. The first painted man, the one who'd been secretly paid to play this role, slumped over onto the pavement, as if dead. His hands and feet twitched, which Zoey thought was a bit over the top. Then Azalea spoke in a voice that had been calibrated by their software to inspire pure dread. This man has been designated a violent threat and executed. Everyone in the vicinity who does not relent and repent will suffer the same fate." The feathered machine then revved its motors, its intersecting rings of eyes spinning faster. Each member of the mob below had a decision to make. We often boil this choice down to fight or flight, but Zoey knew from personal experience that there was a third common reaction: freeze. As Azalea readied its next attack, Zoey found all three in the mob below. Some ran for their lives, some froze in place, as if waiting for instructions. What the plan needed was for that third fight group to focus entirely on the flying machine. Azalea opened its red eye, and its green dye sprayed forth, only now it rotated so that all were being sprayed and tagged. As it sprayed, it lowered itself closer to the people, low enough that it seemed well within range of attack. A woman in the audience who was walking on crutches swung one of them, bonking the outer ring of eyes. "Get it!" someone shouted. The fighters fought, and the freezers watched as Azalea was battered with projectiles until it wobbled and started to fall, screaming louder and angrier warnings that only added fuel to the mob's rage. Axel and the rest of the liberationists were now quickly retreating into the mall behind them, ditching their robes and disappearing into the bustling swirl of shoppers and tourists. Axel was the last one in, locking the mall doors to prevent pursuit from the rioters. Soon, the mechanical angel of judgment tumbled to the pavement. Just moments later, the second man to be dyed green stood atop it, and, with a primal howl of rage, smashed its center red eye with a cinder block. Chapter 34. Mega Boss Alonzo Dunn was awaiting vote results at a bustling barbecue held in the downtown park. Thousands of supporters and random hungry people would wash in and out of the event through the day, grabbing a rib or chicken leg, and, hopefully, casting a vote with their phone. As with everything Alonzo did, it was loose and casual, and also carefully calculated. It was a beautiful day, with temperatures in the 60s, and you couldn't beat the vibe of tens of thousands of smiling folks enjoying free food while old-timey blues music wafted from the speakers. Alonzo intended to spend the day mingling with the crowd, taking pictures and shaking hands. The unspoken message was clear. This is all most people want, to enjoy their lives and to be left alone. And in case the unspoken message wasn't conveyed, it would also be spoken by Alonzo, loudly, several dozen times. Zoey and the Suits had intended to spend much of Election Day at the park barbecue, not on stage, but simply among the citizens, making it clear whose side they were on. There, they could wait for any crisis to break out and respond as needed. Around lunchtime, Zoey was in the park eating a barbecue chicken wing when Will came along. He looked disapprovingly at the wing and then glanced at Zoey's white lapel for stains. Zoey said, "It's a chicken wing, Will. It's either this or you can feed it to me so I can keep my hands clean. We need to leave." "What's happened?" Echo, who was close behind, answered for him. "All of the streaming viewers are on Aviv's event, and, while I know we said we weren't looking at the exit polls, it's clear that he's moving votes." "So? I don't see how Aviv would be any worse than the candidates we have now." "Do you even know his politics?" asked Will. "You understand that we're not just supporting Alonzo based on a general vibe, right? He has specific government appointments to make and specific laws to get passed and enforced. But even then, the problem isn't that Aviv will win. There isn't enough time to get the largest block of votes. Most of the city won't even have heard of him by the time polls close. The problem is it doesn't take much to swing the election, and he can easily peel off enough to do that." "How do we know he won't swing it to us?" "We don't," replied Echo, "and we can't model the outcome either way. He's appealing to those who weren't going to vote at all because they hate both candidates, plus some who just want chaos. Identifying exactly who those voters are, how many of them exist, and how they'll behave is difficult to impossible." "So what are we supposed to do about that?" "We go to the Safari Bistro," said Will, "and you try to convince him to scrap his write-in campaign and throw his support to Alonzo." "What makes you think he'll listen to me?" Will and Echo just stared in response. "All right, let me finish my wing. Somebody get me a damp towel." Zoey had been taken aback by the size of the crowd when they'd had their aborted breakfast several hours earlier, but that turned out to be a mere beachhead for the main assault. The Safari Bistro throng was now engulfing several city blocks and was more raucous than either of the other two candidate gatherings. Many weren't there because they wanted Aviv to be mayor, but for the reason Andre had mentioned earlier. They thought it was a stunt, the final act of Aviv's election prank trilogy. After months of brutal, negative campaigning between the two known major candidates, here was a charismatic agent of chaos, stealing the spotlight from both in a way that surely infuriated them. It had thus become publicly safe and beneficial to be known as an Aviv fan. He was filling a void in the zeitgeist. It also came at the perfect time, since the Catharsis Festival was over, as was the Sex Butcher Hunt. Residents and tourists alike were looking for the next weird thing. Were they about to see a grand escape from a devious trap? Were they about to see a man gruesomely die in the attempt? If you wanted to know, you didn't dare look away. It was almost, Zoey thought, like Aviv had planned it from the start. Getting through the crowd this time was going to require the opposite of stealth. They took the flashiest company helicopter and landed on the only building with a pad on the roof, still a few blocks away, and made a show of flying the aircraft low over the crowd on their approach. Zoey and her entire surviving team then made their way down the sidewalk toward the zoo restaurant, creating quite a stir in the process. Zoey at one point had to stop and sign an autograph for a girl who, once again, had shaved a stripe in her scalp to approximate the bald spot Zoey had just that morning tried desperately to hide with a side part. She also noticed that they kept passing people eating exotic corn dogs, one guy munching on a hot dog enshrouded in a coating of French fries, another one that seemed to be enrobed by a sliced open Twinkie and then deep fried. The elusive corn dog truck was surely nearby, but in one more cruel irony, Zoey was now in no mood to patronize it. As they reached the densest part of the crowd, Aviv stood atop a table and shouted, "Let her through! That's Zoey Ish! And her scary entourage! Let them through!" By the time Zoey, Will, Andre, and Echo arrived at the orange fence around the old open-air restaurant, they were being tracked by seemingly every flying camera in the city, everyone assuming that their appearance was part of the stunt. Aviv approached the fence with a huge smile on his face. "Don't smile at me," growled Zoey. "I'm coming in there." She climbed over the fence. Pistol Wizard rushed over, his 6-gun at the ready. "Get back, missy." She did not. She stumbled into the restricted area, rolled to the ground, then got up and brushed dirt off her skirt. "If you shoot me," she told Pistol Wizard, "my people will kill you and everybody you know. I have to talk to Aviv, in private." She grabbed Aviv's elbow and pulled him toward the only enclosed space, the restrooms off to their left. Pistol Wizard fired a shot into the air. Zoey flinched, but kept walking. Pistol Wizard chased after them, weakly shouting, "Hey!" "All you have to do is wait outside," said Zoey, not even turning to address him. "Aviv clearly doesn't want to escape, so I can't imagine what you're afraid is going to happen in here." Before Pistol could even respond, they reached the restroom, and Zoey shoved Aviv inside, then closed and locked the door behind them. Aviv grinned. "You look amazing. I could strangle you right now. It's just lies on top of lies. You don't care about me. You care about your fame and selling branded merchandise." "Nar, we can't do that," he said, stopping Zoey's hands. She had taken off her jacket and had been in the process of unbuttoning her shirt. "I mean, I want to, but we physically can't. You have to know why. Because your idiot captor could barge in on us?" "No, because of the constrictor wire." "What wire?" She pulled his collar away from his neck. "You don't even have one on." "Oh, I very much do." "Where?" Aviv just stared, a strange smile on his face. Zoey said, "You can't be serious." "It's partially my fault," said Aviv, unbuttoning his pants. "The loop was too small to go around my head, and Pistol Wizard didn't know how to loosen it. So while he was struggling with it, I might have sarcastically suggested an alternate placement for it, and he might have decided from that it was a good idea. See?" He pulled his pants down and showed her. "I can't slide it off," he noted, "because it's behind my—" "Shut up. Aviv, I've only known you for like 2 days, but I am confident in saying that this is the kind of thing that could only happen to you." "I know, right?" Zoey sighed and squeezed her eyes while Aviv buttoned up his pants. "This thing, your run for mayor, this was your plan all along, wasn't it?" "Yes, that was the election day stunt. I was going to put in my name, and we were going to rig the screens downtown to display Vote for Aviv slogans, stuff like that. The voting app makes it really easy to do write-ins. If enough people write in a name, the software starts auto-suggesting it in that field as the day goes on. We tested it, and—" "You looked me right in the face and told me you weren't going to do this." "I said I wouldn't do anything to disrupt voting, and I'm not. I'm running as a write-in. Nobody's being tricked. They can choose to vote for me or not." "And what's your plan if you win?" I won't win. Come on. Novelty riding candidates don't actually win elections. In a normal city, no. Have you honestly not? She was interrupted by a roar from the crowd outside. Oh God, she asked. What is it now? She stepped back out of the restroom and found the crowd outside the orange fence was parting for a new arrival. Zoey suspected she knew who that new arrival was, mainly because there was only one person who could truly make the situation exponentially worse, and, according to the rules of the ancient curse that this city apparently lived under, that's who it had to be. Leonidas Damon and an entourage that included his wife and assistants made their way through the crowd. Damon smiling his fake smile and waving as if he was among friendly supporters, though here he most definitely was not. He forced his way toward the spot in the fence where the rest of the suits were waiting for Zoey to return. So now all becomes clear, announced Damon as he reached the fence, using his stump speech voice. The corrupt puppeteers of this city put together a scheme to try to thwart the will of the people. Honestly, it's insulting that you think it's so easy to manipulate the public. Andre said, Did any of this look easy? Zoey approached the fence. I promise you that not only did we not ask Aviv to run, but I am officially asking him in front of all the cameras and all these people to please drop this write-in campaign. It's just confusing the voters. She said this while awkwardly trying to rebutton her shirt. And what exactly do you think we planned? Do you think we blew up our own building? Do you think that guy, she gestured toward Pistol Wizard, is on the payroll? Look at him. He won't drop out, replied Damon with a sneer. No, he's still got one big stunt left. I don't know what it is, but I bet you do. We definitely do not, insisted Zoey. And considering the horrors that have played out over the last couple of days, the acts of terror, the gruesome deaths, the tensions around the city, she had turned toward Aviv and raised her voice to make it extremely clear who exactly needed to hear this. I can't imagine what kind of whimsical stunt wouldn't be incredibly inappropriate. Leonidas Damon shook his head. You people have nothing to offer the world but distractions. Is that what you want on your tombstone, Zoey? That all you did was feed wasteful habits, selling brief amusements and cheap gratification? Our whole civilization is amusing itself right into the dustbin of history. Andre, who had somehow acquired a corn dog that seemed to be encrusted with Cheetos, said, Hey, this city was built on cheap gratification. Will said, We give people ways to relieve their boredom before it congeals into sadistic cruelty. Whoa, am I missing the potty? Came a booming voice from behind them. The crowd once again parting for its arrival. That was, of course, Mega Boss Alonzo, who, along with his entourage, was pushing his way through to the front, where every camera was now pointing. He apparently had heard that the other key players, and all of the streaming traffic, was converging on this spot and didn't want to be left out. Are we having an impromptu debate? We never got to finish the last one. Damon smirked. I'm sure you'd like us all to believe that you... Oh my God, screamed Zoey. Shut up, all of you. Shut up, shut up, shut up. My head is pounding. I am so sick of listening to men talk and talk and talk. She bent over, her hands on her knees, trying to breathe and settle herself before she said something she didn't mean. She stood, took one more slow, calming breath, and said, No bull has ever shit as much bullshit as you bullshitters shit. Honestly, of course, there are more qualified mayors out there than Alonzo. I'm probably more qualified to be mayor, and I have no idea what specifically a mayor even does. But you... She stabbed a finger at Damon. I look at you and all I see is a smooth, paved road that leads gently downhill into a mass grave. You don't care about humanity. You don't love people. You look at this? She swept her hand across the crowd. and you see an infestation, a mess that needs to be cleaned up so that you can finally have a perfect, orderly society of people who are exactly like you, because you're so narrow in your thinking that you're sure you're the only true human being and that everyone else is trying to be you and just failing to various degrees. And the irony is that if I could somehow breed a destructive personality trait out of humanity, that kind of murderous tribalism would be at the top of the list. Damon said, "We are going to win one way or the other." Now, here's the other thing. I can even tell if you know what's lurking beneath your skin. I think you've dressed up your whole deal in so many pretty words and academic ideas that you can't see the tribal animal inside whispering in your ear. You think you've been blessed by evolution to tame the jungle. I hate that people like you force us into this choice, where we just have to pick some other option based purely on the fact that they're not you. I could spend the rest of the day criticizing Alonzo, but I don't dare, because any criticism of him risks steering history into a mountain of human skulls. Damon smirked. "Are you finished? Because what people like you don't No, I am not finished." Zoey pointed a finger at Aviv, who at the moment was stripping off his shirt with a smug expression, like he was just dying for Zoey to ask him why. She refused. "You," she said to Aviv, "people like you stand on the sidelines and point out what's wrong with the system, getting applause because you throw pies in faces. But if you were put in charge, the whole thing would collapse in a day. You don't have any solution beyond what a toddler would offer. Everyone should have everything they want, for free, all the time. Well, guess what? There's more collective wants than there is collective stuff. So now what? You don't know, because criticizing the system without taking the risk of offering alternatives is nothing. It's a dog barking at thunder." Aviv had already taken off his shoes and socks and was now removing his pants. Echo muttered, "Why is he—" "Don't ask. That's just what he wants. He has some kind of stunt in mind, and he's not going to be deterred. It's best that we just ignore him. Everybody, just vote your conscience. Ignore all of the sideshow. Stop following politics like it's a sport designed to entertain you. Do what you think is right. Then regular folks, rank and file humans grinding away in cubicles will try to make it work, like always." "She's right," declared Aviv. Zoey turned to find that he was now standing in the safari bistro, totally nude, to cheers and hoots from the crowd. Damon sneered and said, "Don't make a fool of yourself." "Too late," replied Aviv. "Thank all of you for your support, and thank you for coming out here and keeping me company during my imprisonment. But I've grown tired of this, and I think we're done here. So, yeah, if you want to vote for me, do it. If you want to vote for somebody else, that's okay too. But let me leave you with this final statement. Here is what the future will look like under Leonidas Damon." Aviv got down into a sprinter's stance. The crowd went dead silent. He took several deep breaths, like he was bracing himself. Echo whispered, "What is he doing?" Will said, "I can tell you, with all sincerity, that I have no fucking idea." Aviv took off toward them, sprinting toward the orange fence. Pistol Wizard made some noise about stopping or he'd shoot, but he seemed as confused as anyone else. Zoey backed up, as did the rest of the crowd, gawkers munching on their corn dogs, eager to see what was about to happen next. Aviv ran with determination, as if running from his own mortality, as if chasing down a destiny that was just as determined to evade him. He was heading for the dining table that happened to be the closest to the orange fence. He reached the table, leaped onto it, then jumped off the table, both arms in the air. The nude man almost cleared the fence. Instead, his ankles hooked the top of the fence, causing his body to flip end over end, his momentum pushing him past the invisible barrier that would activate the constrictor wire. There was an almost inaudible wet squinch, and Aviv, his eyes suddenly wide, had birthed a spray of crimson from his groin. His body pinwheeled toward the crowd, causing his severed genitalia to soar ungracefully through the air, the momentum of Aviv's spinning body launching the member like a trebuchet. The elongated wad of undulating flesh floated through the air until it smacked Leonidas Damon square in the face, leaving a red splatter on his cheek. Aviv flopped to the ground. There were gasps from the crowd. Confusion froze everyone in place. Echo had her hand over her mouth. Andre had been in the middle of chewing his corn dog, then spat it out. Will, his expression unchanged, said, "Huh." 4 figures emerged from the crowd at full speed, one of them carrying a white medical-grade cooler. Zoey thought this was awfully convenient, but, of course, the cooler bearer was Sig, and the other 3 were members of Aviv's support team/trauma unit. One of them flipped open a briefcase that unfolded itself into a stretcher, and, with practiced efficiency, they staunched the bleeding on the man's groin and gathered up his severed part to put it on ice. They raced through the crowd with the wounded man on the stretcher, down the sidewalk, until they were met by an ambulance that had, again, been conveniently waiting in the exact right spot. There was a smattering of uncertain applause. Leonidas Damon was forcing one of his assistants to clean his face with a disinfectant wipe. Nearby, a crying child vomited. Pistol Wizard stood, his gun at his side, watching the ambulance race away, sirens blaring, hopefully to the nearest hospital. He scrunched up his brow and said, "What in the hell was that?" Zoey sighed. Democracy, apparently. I'm going home. Chapter 35. Zoey. Hey, would you mind if I came to see you? It's fine if you're not feeling up to it. Woo. No. Zoey. No, you don't want me to come, or no, you wouldn't mind? Woo. Don't come. Zoey. Okay, I understand. Do you mind if I ask, how are you doing? Woo. Without bringing food. Something soft, because of my teeth. Zoey. Done. Woo. Who won mayor? Zoey. The polls are just about to close. We'll find out together. She arrived at the top floor of the hospital with an assortment of dishes from food trucks outside, including bingsu, a hair-thin, creamy ice noodles, kakigori, shaved ice with the texture of packed snow, soaked with heavy coconut cream and mango sauce, and a layered milkshake cocktail that would phase through 5 different flavors as you made your way down. She was greeted in the hallway by Woo's wife, May. Zoey braced herself. Zoey had always gotten the impression that May hated her, mainly because the woman made little effort to hide it. The circumstances of this meeting, that Zoey had gotten her husband buried in an exploded building, had her preparing herself for anything up to and including a physical assault. May spotted her, and Zoey instinctively turned to hand off her tray of treats to Andre, just in case. It was a good thing she did. The woman raced up to Zoey and gave her an aggressive hug. Hi, said Zoey. He told me how you stayed with him. My goodness, what a story. It must have been terrifying. I've barely had time to dwell on it. I suspect when my schedule frees up, all the trauma will catch up to me at once. Well, we'll be praying for you. Woo's teenage children were parked on a bench in the hall, each playing games on their phone. One of them was wearing a Justice for Bandito t-shirt. Outside Woo's room, a full suite in the rich people section of the facility, were 2 men in pink suits, who Zoey knew were on loan from her own private security company, there in case some bad guys came after Woo and sent more than the 3 or so he could handle himself from the hospital bed. When she entered the room and saw him, she burst into tears. Woo's left leg was in a cylindrical black cage with various tubes running off of it. His right ankle was in a plastic cast similar to the one Zoey still wore on her sprain. His face was swollen almost beyond recognition. Black and purple bruises covered his jaw. It looks worse than it is, he slurred. then immediately shifted his gaze to Andre. Oh, give me the one with the straw. The monitor in his room was already on, currently showing street streamer Charlie Chopra, who was covering the smashing of Liberator Angel drones. Angry mobs were also downing any drones that sort of looked angelic, including those belonging to a flower delivery company who'd chosen devices that looked like Cupid. Zoey swiped it to election coverage. She asked, "How long does it take them to count the votes?" 0 seconds, said Echo, who'd arrived in the hall behind her. It's all electronic, so there's nothing to be counted. It just holds off on announcing the results until the last person has voted. Your boyfriend just got out of surgery, said Wu. He's down the hall. Echo added, They think the video of his, accident will set the record for fastest spreading clip in Blink history. Specifically, the version someone posted that was in extreme slow motion. Zoey sighed. Please tell me I'm not visible in the clip that's going around. You are, Echo replied, failing to hide her glee. And the slowed down zoom on your facial expression is really something. You can see several emotions playing out on your face at once. What, were you guys watching it on the car on the way over? I had intended to watch it once, just to understand what exactly had occurred, but it bothered Will so much that I wound up replaying it a few dozen times. Do we have results yet? That was Will, who joined Echo in the hall. They both shuffled into the room so they could see the monitor. Zoey looked to Wu. Do you hate it when your hospital room is all crowded like this? I always hated it. It will be fine until the pain medication wears off. Then I become very irritable. Zoey's mother arrived next, squeezing into the room. Have I missed it? What happened? Will shushed everyone. The vote results were in. A news talking head standing in front of City Hall went live. He said the results would be read as they were released, in no particular order. Zoey clenched her fist as she waited. And then, the first results appeared on screen as the reporter read aloud. Megaboss Alonzo Dunn, 28%. Everyone in Wu's hospital room groaned. Someone down the hall, presumably a Leonidas Damon supporter, cheered and clapped. Zoey scanned the faces around her and saw only uniform dread as more results rolled in. Write-in, Zoey Ash, 12%. Zoey's mother hooted and clapped, then suddenly stopped after a sharp look from her daughter. The suits had known some would write in Zoey's name, and her canvassers had been told specifically to discourage that, as any such support would be taken directly from Alonzo, but they hadn't spent a lot of time thinking about or planning for this result. Still, muttered her mother, it's nice that people like you. Zoey didn't reply. With a sick feeling, she watched the rest of the numbers arrive. Write-in, Bandito the Raccoon, 13%. I'm sorry, that's hilarious. Write-in, Aviv, 5%. Write-in, Amazing Aviv, 6%. Write-in, The Amazing Aviv, 4%. Zoey shook her head. I knew allowing write-ins was a bad idea. I feel like I'm in a nightmare. Write-in, Aviv's Flying Severed Dingus, 1%. Other write-in, 4%. Will and Echo exchanged looks, rapidly trying to do the math in their heads. Before they could work through it, the talking head read out the answer at the same time it appeared on the screen. Leonidas Damon, 27%. Wait, said Zoey. Did we win? We did, replied Will. Though, if you combined their votes, the actual winner was Aviv, Aviv's dick, and an exploded raccoon. It's so close between Alonzo and Damon, said Zoey's mother. Will he demand a recount? Echo shrugged. There's nothing to recount. It's a database. That data was entered directly by the voters. The feed cut to Alonzo's election night party in the park, where the crowd was cheering and weeping. It then cut to Leonidas Damon's gathering, where everyone just seemed incredibly confused. Zoey looked to Will. So, did this play out exactly according to your secret plan you came up with months ago? He sighed and said, "Sure, why not?" Contrary to what Wu had said, Aviv was not, in fact, down the hall, but was located in an adjacent tower connected by 2 elevators, a sky bridge, 6 hallways, and 3 helpful staff who redirected Zoey when she got lost. The whole complex seemed like a prank hospital somebody had built just to mock her. But finally, she found a room packed with so many balloons and flowers that it had to have violated some hospital regulations. She knocked on the door frame, and Aviv, who was covered in a blanket but seemed to have a lot of tubes and wires snaking out from under there, lit up at the sight of her. "Hey," he proclaimed, "it looks like I'm going to be okay. They did a surgery, I guess, to temporarily reattach things and get the blood flowing, but the real surgery is tomorrow to connect all the nerves and such at a micro level. They're having a world-famous surgeon from Hong Kong do it remotely with these robot arms. Isn't that wild?" Sig was seated next to the bed, looking exceptionally cranky, though Zoey thought she was one of those people who just had a cranky resting face. "She doesn't want to hear all the gory details," said Sig. "I think you're lucky she stopped by at all." "Ah, Sig is squeamish about this stuff." Sig leveled a disbelieving gaze at him. "I picked it up with my bare hands and put it in a cooler. And I've told you how much I appreciate it." To Zoey, he said, "I had my team on hand in case the trap went off. What I did at the end there, that was spontaneous. I just came up with it on the spot." "I'm going to be frank," replied Zoey. "It didn't look planned, and as a piece of political performance art, I also have to admit I'm not at all clear on the message. Maybe that was my intent." "So what happens when you get out? Do you move on to the next city? Plan your next stunt?" "Even if so, I could still come back to see you. Or you could see me. You have your own helicopter. And because it'll take time for me to, recover, we could actually just hang and spend time together. Actually get to know each other. Talk." "Uh-huh. So, how long will it take you to, recover?" "Well, the doctor said 6 weeks, but when I told him it was you, he was like, 3 months at least. She'll pull it right off." Sig threw up her hands and left the room. "She's had a rough few days," said Aviv. "So your guy won the election, right?" The monster didn't win, which is what matters. In my world, that's about the best we can manage. I have to go. My foot is killing me. I want to go home and knock myself out with pain meds. When I get out, we'll get a room. A cheap one. Order some Chinese food and watch a romantic comedy." "Aviv, we don't even know if we can tolerate each other's company for longer than it takes to have sex and get dressed." "Let's find out." She sighed and said, "Sure, why not? But just to be clear, you and I have nothing in common." "Of course not. It'd be outrageous for me to even suggest such a thing. That's why we should get together, so you can find out we have nothing in common. Then you can move on." He delivered all of this with a toothy grin. God, the guy was so sure he was great at this. "Whatever," sighed Zoey. "In the time it takes you to get out of here, you'll probably meet some hotter girl and forget all about me." At some point in the conversation, Zoe's body had moved closer to the bed, and it was now holding hands with Aviv. She studied all of the wires and tubes, and wondered if they would get damaged if she were to climb onto the bed and snuggle her face into Aviv's neck. "And, I'm sorry," said Aviv. "About your friend Bud, I mean. I know he meant a lot to you guys. There was a time right at the start when we were getting my drill, and the rest of your team were doing scans and all that, when we thought we could get everybody out. We thought maybe you'd all survived. So I was there when the news came. It sounds like the guy was a legend." "Now that he's gone, I think he'll literally be that. A legend. Nobody will believe he's actually dead." She released his hand, wiped her eyes, and said, "All right, I'll get out of here and let you rest." She slapped his thigh. "You're going to need it." Zoey left his room and felt like maybe, finally, somehow, she was done with tense meetings for a while. She couldn't remember the last time she hadn't had some strategy session or debate or something on her calendar that tied her guts in knots. As she headed down the hospital hall, she almost felt weightless. She studied signs to try to figure out how to get back to Aviv's room, took what she thought was the right elevator, and, one floor down, it opened to let on another passenger. Streamer and amateur detective Margaret Mole. Zoey said, "Oh, come on." "I won't stop this one," said Margaret, both hands perched atop her umbrella as the doors closed. "Do you know who I trailed to wind up here? Lyra Connor, who had an appointment to discuss reconstructive surgery on her face." "I guess that's good," said Zoey, "as it seems like that will get results for her quicker than waiting for all of society to stop judging women based purely on appearance." "I also wanted to let you know that I was there when you were doing your show at the airport. Well, my camera was. You use software to detect feeds, but as with anything, it's an arms race between detection and evasion. The feed wasn't public. It was just for me, so I could understand." "I saw it when it hovered into the room," said Zoey, "and I assumed it hadn't just arrived there, but I didn't tell my team that." Margaret had to pause a moment to process this. "I'm working on the unsolved Rex cases. The ones overseas, I mean. It would be nice to bring closure to those families." "Oh, that's good. How did he die? Really?" "I don't know what you're talking about." There was a pause. Then Margaret said, "Well, I'm glad the 3 women are safe." "Are the other 2 safe? That's good news." Margaret nodded. "Before coming here, Lyra met all 3 of the women for celebratory drinks and very cursory disguises. A lot of smiles, a lot of laughter. They seem to be planning new financial futures for themselves." Zoey just watched the floors count down. "It appears you're determined not to say anything to me," said Margaret. "And I understand, though I wish I had the answer to just one question. Why not simply tell the truth?" "I still don't know what you're talking about, but somebody once told me that sometimes the truth looks like a lie, and the only way you can set things straight is to tell a lie that looks more like the truth than the truth." "That sounds like something a lawyer would say, or a politician." And what nobody had to tell me, because I figured it out myself, is that people are just people, but celebrities are an idea. If you want to stop one, you can't just kill the person. You have to kill the idea. The look on Margaret's face indicated that she had, in fact, gotten the answer she was seeking. The elevator dinged, the door opened, and they both stepped off. "So," continued Zoey, upon finding the hallway empty of eavesdroppers, "you're saying you know something the public doesn't. Are you obligated to share that information?" "I am not a journalist. I seek justice for victims who have been failed by the system. That keeps me quite busy in a city that barely has a system at all." "Are you sure? You could get quite a bit of publicity for your streams by blowing the lid on, well, whatever you believe we've done here." "My dear, if fame was my goal, I would have learned to sing. Some of us do just want to see the right thing done. I would say most of us, in fact." "Do you think I'm one of you? One of the good guys?" "Time will tell," replied the older woman as she shuffled down the hall. "I'll be watching either way." Zoey watched her go, then surveyed the unfamiliar surroundings and realized she had, in fact, gotten on the wrong elevator. Chapter 36. Bud Billingsley's funeral was strange, in that nothing at the event openly marked it as being for Bud, or being a funeral. It was held late at night in Frisco, a genuine Old West ghost town, about a half-hour west of the city. Bud had apparently bought the land that used to be Frisco, which at the time of purchase had contained mainly a collection of dilapidated shacks and fenced-over mine shafts. The genuine buildings had since been roped off for preservation, and around them was built an open-air bar/grill/nightclub. The music was low, the lighting soft. A gentle breeze rustled the scrub brush. Attendees instinctively kept their voices calm, as if this was a sacred place in which the dead were trying to rest. Hundreds showed up, and Zoey knew none of them. Andre introduced one fancy guest after another, with connections and relationships stated only in vague terms. There were a lot of associates and friends, faces from all around the world. She heard at least 4 different languages spoken in the conversations she passed, and she knew there was a whole collection of prominent figures who couldn't come, or who couldn't be seen attending. Instead, the suits had set up an area for flowers and other gifts, one so inundated with colorful displays that it looked like a rose parade float had crashed there. Many of the gifts, Andre had said, came with unsigned cards and cryptic messages that only those close to Bud would understand. Virtually none included his name. She and Andre then ran into Alonzo and Dee, the former in a black suit, and the latter in a stunning gown designed to look like she was enshrouded by gleaming black eels with bright red pinprick eyes. Andre said, "Good evening, Mr. Mayor." "Man, don't use that word," replied Alonzo. "I had Dee spend the last week helping me put together a to-do list for my first 100 days, and just looking at it gave me a heart attack. I say to her, this is a nightmare. Whose idea was this? The desk in the mayor's office has 7 drawers. I'll need at least 5 of them for alcohol." Dee just shook her head. "I told you." "Do you have an official position?" Zoey asked her. "Comptroller? Chamber of Commerce? I'm just throwing out words I remember seeing on yard signs." "Oh, don't think I didn't ask," said Alonzo. "She's got it in her head that she'd wind up getting stuck with all the work. No, she's got something far more ambitious in mind. She wants to unionize the sex workers." "Now that's interesting. All the powerless can do is gather together," said Dee, "organize, and gain some power in numbers." Alonzo shook his head. "And good luck with that. Impose too many rules, and girls will just work outside the organization. Try to stop them, and you're right back to where you started, with prohibition." This is a world of infuriatingly imperfect solutions, but you'll find that out soon enough. Zoey looked around. "Do you know where Will is?" Andre pointed. "Old graveyard. You'll see it, over in that direction." On the way, Zoey found Echo, wearing a tight black floor-length dress with a slit up to her hip. She was being hit on by a man with the build and composure of an NFL quarterback. Echo spotted Zoey and used it as an excuse to break away, pretending like she had some urgent business to discuss. "How are you holding up?" asked Echo once they were on their own. "Hospitals, funerals, conversations with strangers in suits. My last week has been a buffet of all my least favorite things." "Let's get away to a beach somewhere, a private one. Just the 2 of us, or just you if you want to be alone." "No, I need you as my social buffer. You know I can't talk to people. Just tell me when and I'll follow you to the airport. How are you holding up?" "This is the worst it's ever been for me. Losing someone, I mean. When I came on board, Bud was the one who tried to bring me into the fold. No one else even knew what I was doing here. He was the one who said, 'Around here, you make your own role.' Then he showed me how." "So this is worse than when my father died, just before I got here." Echo had to think about that for a moment. "I don't know. My relationship with Arthur was complicated. He was the king, but he liked the idea of me more than he liked me. You know how men are. And he became weird and distant at the end. He sensed he was, I don't know, on a dark path. Like we didn't know what was going to happen, but we were all preparing for something. It's hard to explain." "How is Will doing?" "Go ask. He's right over there. I'll set a date for our beach thing, and if you try to back out, I'll sedate you and drag you onto the plane myself." "Sounds good." Echo broke off, and Zoey found Will Blackwater standing alone at a wrought iron fence, surrounding an ancient cemetery full of crooked tombstones, so weathered that some names were no longer legible. Memories literally erased by time. "Do you have your flask?" she asked him. "Left it at home," answered Will, without looking at her. "I'm trying to cut back." You know the weirdest part? I still expect to find out this was all an op. That Bud is going to pop out of the shadows, explaining that this was a ruse for some purpose or other. I wish. But if you're seriously asking, no. We wouldn't have left you out of the loop on something like that. I know you're still blaming yourself, and I've accepted that nothing I say will stop you from doing that. So, I guess I'll just leave it be. Will just kind of grunted. "So who's buried here? Old-timey prospectors?" Will nodded. "In the late 1800s, some guys found this mine, sold it for $25,000, thinking they'd won the lottery. The next owners would go on to extract $50 million worth of silver and gold. A thriving little town grew up around it. Then the mine collapsed, and that was that. The town dried up and blew away like dead grass. If you look at these tombstones, you see a lot of birth and death years close together, sometimes the same year. Children, babies, dead of disease, starvation, violence, horrible injuries. And now people like us mingle over their bones and sip champagne." He pulled out his flask and took a drink. He tried to put it back inside his jacket, but Zoey yanked it away. He said, "You know every swallow of that is about $4,000, right?" "There's one thing still bothering me," she said, as she used her dress to wipe the spit off Will's flask. "You've talked about how my dad's romantic partners were always a security threat, that you had to do a quick vetting of them almost on the fly to make sure whatever floozy he was bringing home wasn't an assassin or somebody trying to get in to do corporate espionage or blackmail. When Aviv drilled his way into the house, then spent hours with me unsupervised, that should have been an absolute crisis, especially with the election. But you barely cared." "There was a lot going on." Zoey took a long drink from the flask, and then handed it back to him. Then she said, "I think you had vetted him already." "We looked into him, since he had publicly stated his goal was to get into the estate, if that's what you mean. I think you knew he was going to get into the house that night. Maybe you didn't know exactly how, but you knew he was going to succeed." Will didn't answer. "Even weirder," added Zoey, "you kept the team away from the house that night, with the security staff at the festival. They said you kept delaying them." "Once again, I sense that you're accusing me of something, but I can't begin to guess what." "Uh-huh. So, total change of subject. When you vetted women for my father, did you ever get proactive? Like, you found a woman, dug into her background, and set him up with her in order to keep him from going after some other worse woman? I can't even imagine how Arthur would have reacted to finding out I'd done something like that." What an interesting answer. "So, how long would you say we need to stay at this event before we ditch it for some smoky bar where you can bend my ear with Bud Billingsley stories while we get incredibly drunk?" "I would say the time it takes us to walk across the party and get to the car." "Are you talking about just you and me, or the whole team?" "Whole team." He nodded. "Andre knows more stories than I do. I mean, if it was just you and me getting plastered together, I think that could be dangerous." Will didn't reply, but didn't look like he needed clarification either. "All right, let's get the hell out of here." No, that's not what I'm saying," slurred Andre around his cigar. "I'm not a religious man. I'm not saying I believe it. I'm saying that the Bible itself says God is a cheat. If he came into one of our joints, we'd have to kick him out." Zoey was gazing vacantly at the city lights sprawled out behind tendrils of smoke. They were at a rooftop cigar lounge that Bud had frequented and possibly owned. Golden braziers kept the chill at bay, and the most beautiful man Zoey had ever seen was tinkling away on a grand piano at the center of the space. Zoey suspected her hair would stink like aged tobacco for a month. You know the bit in the New Testament where Jesus resurrected that guy, continued Andre. What was his name? Lazarus, said Echo. Yeah, Bud told me one time, and Bud grew up religious, you know. He told me one time that bit was the one that stuck with him, because Jesus finds out his friends has died, and Jesus is God incarnate. But this man, the man who was also God, he goes, and when he sees the corpse, you know what he does? He cries. Jesus wept, muttered Echo. In Sunday school we had to memorize a verse, and I picked that one because it's only 2 words long. She glanced over at Zoey. Your cigar has gone out. Yeah, I think mine is defective. You're supposed to take a puff every minute or so, noted Will. It won't just burn itself down. The wet end is getting gross anyway. I'm still talking, said Andre, as a server set a fresh drink on the table in front of him. And listen, because this is meaningful. So, Jesus cries at the sight of death, is my point. And that's crazy, because he's God. He's all-knowing and all-powerful. But even he, when he sees the dead body of a friend in front of him, crumbles. He can't handle it. You see, they don't have that up in heaven, the dying. He cried because until that moment, he didn't know. Do you see what I'm saying? Until he saw it, God didn't know what death was. Not really. He had to experience it like we do. And when he finally did, his ass couldn't handle it. And then he undid it, added Echo. Andre nodded in the exaggerated manner of a drunk telling a story and realizing someone has actually been listening. Yes, exactly. He resurrects his friend, which is against the rules. Nobody else gets to do that. For us, death is forever. But when it was Jesus' own pal, he said no. I don't accept this. I can't. So while the dealer wasn't looking, he pulled new cards out of his sleeve. And that was where Bud landed on God. That he may be all-powerful, he may be all-knowing, but when he came down here to our world and tried to play our game, he couldn't hack it. He couldn't take the thing he saddles us with every day. This death. This losing people. This never getting to say goodbye. When he came down and tried to play the game he created, the sheer random cruelty of it knocked him flat. That drone is circling. I think it's press. That was Wu, less than 2 days removed from his most recent surgery, and trying not to create a trip hazard with his armored right leg. My cigar has also gone out, but it's fine. It's been giving me a lightheaded feeling ever since Will told me what it cost. Will shot a glance toward the whirring machine orbiting the building. If somebody out there thinks we're that interesting, I feel like they're the true victims. In fact, said Echo, all he did was cheat. When Jesus got a huge crowd together and didn't plan any kind of food for them to eat, he just makes loaves and fishes appear out of thin air. He didn't want to deal with the logistics, finding reputable fish and loaf dealers, rationing out everything so there'll be enough for the folks in the back, keeping the hungry crowd calm. He just turns on the infinite food cheat code. Yes, proclaimed Andre as he slapped the table with an open palm. Exactly. So if Bud is standing for judgment right now, and I know it's been several days, but who knows when the wait time's like up there, but if he's been judged, I think he'd say, all I did when I was on Earth is what you did when you were visiting. I saw what I needed to accomplish, and if rules stood in the way, I found a way. You think that would fly? Asked Will through a scotch glass. With the guy who set up the whole trick with the apple. Oh, are we talking about God? Asked Zoe's mother, who just shown up, wearing a dress Zoe wouldn't have the confidence to wear even in private. What would your ideal afterlife be, if you got to choose? This right here, replied Andre, pointing down at the table. Send me back to Earth, reincarnate me or whatever. Give me another go-around. Only maybe I haven't retained what I learned this time. Well, you know, said Echo, in the Bible, heaven isn't even described as this vacation paradise in the clouds. It's all action and political intrigue. Angels fighting armies of demons with flaming swords. If so, I'll take that. Imagine you're old and dying in your hospital bed. Then you open your eyes and you've got a new muscular body. Then Gabriel is like, good, you're here. Take this flaming lawn sword. A dragon got loose and we've got to go take it down. I think I'd take the vacation paradise, said Wu, but I'd first ask to have my personality altered into the kind of person who enjoys vacations. Turn off the hypervigilance. Wait, do we get to change our personalities? Asked Zoey. Man, I wouldn't even know where to start. In that case, if I can turn myself into the kind of person who enjoys anything, then why do I even need a heaven? Turn me into a happier person and just send me back here, like Andre. Or just send me back as Andre. What's your heaven like, Mom? Just a big club where everybody is really hot? I think I'd love just talking to all the people. All the ancient rulers and thinkers and rock stars. Think of the amazing stories they'd have to tell. If you want the most interesting stories, muttered Will, you probably need to go to the other place. Nah, everybody goes to heaven. Bud would have agreed. So what's your perfect afterlife, Will? Will thought about it, but showed no sign of enjoying those thoughts. When you get to the point that you've lost as many people as I have, seeing them again would be enough. Well, that, and I would have some very hard questions for the boss. Will, said Echo, forcing the words around her cigar, you're bringing down the mood. It's just a thought experiment. What would your perfect situation be, if you could have any possible situation? Zoey raised her hand. I bet I can answer for him. Seriously, I bet I can. Will seemed skeptical. I'm almost afraid to hear what you're going to say. You get to heaven, only to find it's all burned down. They had an electrical fire or something, and St. Peter says, it's all gone, it's all burned to the ground, and we need you to be in charge of rebuilding it. That's pretty much it. I think that's just about it, exactly. Then, as soon as he's finished, said Echo, I'll burn it all down again with my flaming sword. Wait, how would heaven work if the only thing that makes me happy is ruining Will's thing? Wu was still watching the harmless drone, as if silently wishing it would try something. I'm thinking you've just stumbled across the reason the whole thing couldn't work. Zoey groaned. And another friendly conversation descends into an existential crisis. God, don't you people ever just sit around and talk about sports or something? Wait, where are you going? Will had stood and was putting on his hat. Got an early morning meeting. You guys stay and relax. This place never closes. So that's it, huh? Just always on to the next threat, and dealing with this one while preparing for that one. Probably while already thinking about the one after that? Yep. He grabbed Zoey's half-full glass from in front of her and downed the rest of the contents. And it never ends? She asked, staring into the empty glass. Nope. Well, it ends eventually. Zoey shook her head. It's exhausting. How do you keep yourself going? You pick up the torch the departed are no longer able to carry, and you press on, in their memory. He shrugged. But to be honest, seeing what's next is the best part, and I bet deep down you agree. See you tomorrow. He patted her shoulder and headed off. Zoey leaned back and sighed, watching ghostly tendrils of smoke rise up and dissolve among the stars. Oh boy, and there we have it. Took your time, didn't you, movie boy? Yeah, well, we did it. Said I would, and here we are. We have finished, we are caught up. Almost all of Jason Pargin's works. We have read through all the John Dies at the End series. We have now read through all the Zoey books. That was Zoey is Too Drunk for This Dystopia. Really great. Always love reading through his work. There's no, like, afterward. Like, normally there's, like, a note to the reader or, like, an afterword here or something like that. But in any case, yeah, his new book is out. I'm starting to worry about this Black Box of Doom and I 100% will be reading it for the channel. I'm excited to start that one up after I get all this edited and uploaded eventually. But yeah, man, it's weird because the older read throughs have like way more of a following than the newer stuff typically does, and yet I do have like a small, like committed little base of people that are really looking forward to these things. And for those that had to wait and exercise immense patience in the face of my, I don't know, laziness, like I just procrastination. Even I eventually, sure, I get these things out, but I'm aware that some people are anxiously awaiting with bated breath, and the read throughs aren't, like a primary focus of the channel, but they're still important to me, and I still love doing them, and I have fun doing them, and I'm glad that people enjoy listening. So for those that stuck around and have for all of for this wild, crazy journey, all these books, as I went from cringe and unedited to like edited and better, and now better quality audio, and etc., etc. The quality is improved, and hopefully so has your experience. But I have not much else to say aside from all of that. So, yeah, I'll leave you with my thanks, my appreciation. Again, if you haven't, or rather, if you weren't aware that I read other stuff, I mean, yeah, I have some older like read throughs of like college short stories and whatnot. But if you like the Zoey series, same author did the John Dies at the End series. You may also like a lot. That includes, and I've done all those read throughs as well. That includes John Dies at the End. This book is full of spiders. Seriously, dude, don't open it. What the hell did I just read? And the last one currently, if this book exists, you're in the wrong universe. And those are just those are my original, what got me started in this thing, all the bread and butter, and it's just been quite a journey from there. But anyway, I'm prattling on long enough. Of course, I have plenty of other content on the channel. Welcome to check it out if you so wish. I have a Patreon if you want to support me and what I do and get early access to my reaction content. But that's all the time that I have for tonight, whenever you're listening to this. Thank you guys and gals so much for doing so, and stay tuned for the next book that I read through, which I mean, I've already confirmed it pretty much, but the next book I'm going to be reading will be I'm Starting to Worry About This Black Box of Doom. So, looking forward to it. Love you all. Have a good night, and goodbye, travelers.